everyone. This is Gloria of the Love and the Work You Do podcast. And today I have with me Jessie Newburn. She is someone who believed in me before I believed in myself. So I see her as a mentor. Uh, and she is also a leading expert in generational intelligence. She was a former community and engagement director at Columbia Association in Maryland. Also, a former business development manager. Um, Jessie is also an author of Uber Chronicles. And I have to say, one of the reasons I have Jessie here is that to me, I really see her as really being futuristic. So it would be lovely to hear how she's done some of the things she's done, and even what she sees the future would be. I have to also mention that among Jessie's credits is that in Colombia, she in the days before social media became a thing, started a blogging community called Hoco Blogs. And she also started an event page called Totally Hoco. So more building right there. And right now, of course, as I stated at the beginning, she's into the generational intelligence work. She is consulting on generational intelligence, and that's how the generations can work together or should work together in relationship, in organization, and a great way to harness our gifts together. And so join me in welcoming Jessie
Thank you so much.
to the podcast. Thank you for being here, Jessie.
Thank you for inviting me. Glad to be here.
Thank you. So one thing I learned or picked up from another podcast somewhere is to also let my guests do a brief intro of themselves. If
hmm
you are open to that, can you just introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Sure. As Gloria said, my name's Jessie Newburn, and I'm. It's interesting to hear someone, give the feedback about my life because it's like, oh yeah, that's right, I did that. Oh yeah, that's right, I did that. And oftentimes, when I'm doing things, I either sometimes feel super motivated to go forward, or sometimes feel feel lost and confused, and sort of something lands in my lap, and I pursue that for a while. At this moment in time, I'm in my late 50s. I'm in a place of living at this world and this time, and I'm very fascinated by generational theory and the impact of how different groups of people are born in different times and go on to take that worldview through life. There's actually a whole entire model that I didn't make up, someone else did, but I think is one of the most important and profound things for people to understand about how to live and navigate the world and go forward. I live in Columbia, Maryland, as Gloria and I live there together in a nice little planned urban community. And
Yeah.
I'm fairly calm in a world that's kind of chaotic right now because I actually have a bigger picture understanding of some of the dynamics that are happening. And to Gloria's point, I mean, like I've done a variety of different businesses, some more successfully, some less successfully. Tried a variety of community activities. I've had a lot of identity in the past around being going to Burning Man, and I've actually written some books around that as well. It's still part of my life. Kind of in a state right now, at this phase of knowing I'm in my last wisps and last handful of years of midlife, and that elderhood is next around the corner for me, and kind of like examining life from a new perspective. So I don't really know what else to say about myself. I'm in a place of still figuring things out. I have definitely not walked a path of a super clear line. Another thing Gloria, that you don't know about me, but I started my business many, many years ago in the early 90s, 91.
I know.
In doing
Publishing.
doing desktop publishing back when that was a radical type of technology. The fact that I could center a word or a title on a page and make it 24 point Times Roman. And I had a laser printer, was like, cutting edge for a short period of time. But I also did a lot of resumes, and this whole point about following your path and your purpose and being aligned and going where you want to go. In some ways, I have like a bizarre relationship to this whole phenomena, because I've written over 1,000 resumes for people in my earlier years and was very, very good at it. I mean, I was in 100, when I look back at it, I was in 100% flow state when I wrote resumes. I was just profoundly good at diving into someone else's life, helping them understand where they were, moving them forward, and helping them in this trajectory with a really good feeling about themselves, which is really, I've always known as kind of that cobbler's children have no shoes kind of thing. So I'm like, well, can someone do that for me, please?
Exactly. I feel the same way too. I can delegate and like tell everybody what they can't see, but I
Right.
can't see
It's
mine.
challenging. Yeah.
Yeah,
You need
it
friends
is.
and a lot of reflection for that kind of stuff. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
good friends.
Oh, thank you. So yes, I did dig into your life, and I was like, oh my gosh, she quit her job to start a publishing company when she found out, she had almost as much power as the company she was working for. That's, I think that's, for me, that's one of the futuristic things I see about you, because you can live in the moment and not notice all of those things. But I believe like a couple of people like you are
Mm-hmm.
gifted enough to see that you may be a lone wolf in your thinking,
Mm-hmm.
but you see it, and that you actually took action on it. Now that by itself is a great thing.
Yeah. So part of what Gloria's mentioning about having more power than the company had, like back in the early 90s, my dad, who was a vast consumer of more electronics than anybody could ever need, gave me a computer, which sounded really generous, and it was. But I found out later from his staff that his team of people that worked with him, a small team, was basically like, "You have no more room for any more computers, Jim. Sorry, you can't bring this computer into the office." But anyway, I ended up with a computer, and it was the early 90s, and I was a secretary inside of a world where the pink collar thing was still very, very real,
Mm.
and where men, the executives, did not type their own letters and did not type their own content and all. And I ended up bringing this computer into my office, and this little 40 meg 386 Windows computer with my own little DeskJet printer that I had at the time. I had more power, more computing power on my desk than the entire administrative team
Hmm.
had with their Wang computer and this printer terminal that everyone had to go to and all this kind of stuff. And it really was, when you talk about living a moment, it's sort of like living it and seeing it at the same time. I was like, whoa, like something's going on. And I hated answering my phone, and I hated being a secretary. And so I paid for this. I paid $8.95 a month to have voicemail added onto my phone at an office at a company where I worked.
What?
But it was totally radical. I was expected to sit by my phone and answer and talk to my bosses, talk all this kind of stuff that just is so far away, but not so far away. But I mean, I really was at this cutting edge of understanding of technology and all, and just through a combination of events and stuff, decided to go out on my own and embrace it. Not that I made like a whole lot of money at it or whatever, but I sure did learn a lot, which paid me over time, in different ways. But yeah, it was a brave moment for a young woman, and in a kind of the turning point of a lot of technology. But I
Mm.
definitely have learned that stepping into those points of change and embracing what I can see and feel is coming down the pike, that has done well for me. So yeah.
Hmm. And I think that's the thing. Like when the change is coming, a lot of us don't jump in early enough. But I also feel that maybe the fact that you grew up in Colombia, that might just be me, or maybe it could
Mhm.
have been your parents,
Mhm.
also paved the way for you to be able to think that way. Because, case in point, you went to school at the University of Maryland
Mhm.
for a degree, but
Mhm.
then you decided to create a niche for yourself called culture and technology.
Mhm.
And I even feel like even now there still isn't anything like that, but that is where we are now.
Mhm.
I know the closest degree would be I think Loyola has something called emerging technologies, like a new degree, like called emerging technologies. I know about that,
Mhm.
but like I don't think anybody was thinking about technologies in the 80s. That's
Oh, so yeah, so I think, again, this is just like, thank you, Gloria. It's really beautiful to hear my life reflected back to me. But yeah, that is something I did. And when I think back on it, it's pretty amazing. I'm pretty sure that I'm the first person in the world who ever got a degree in culture and technology. And I don't say that from a braggadocio perspective, because it wasn't like I was like, let me go be the first person in the world to do this. What happened, it's just a matter of events, right? That I went off to college, and I was going to be a biochemistry major because I was good in biology and I was good in chemistry. And so
mhm.
it made sense to me that I would be a biochem major. And I went off to college, and I was just floored by the level of academic focus and, um, kind of, what is it, right brain, whatever the type that I have to go
Right
use
brain,
this
left
word.
brain.
I was like, I took my first freshman chemistry class, and I was like, I am not cut out for this. Like, I can't do this. I would fall asleep. I mean, if I needed to take a nap, all I needed to do was read my chemistry book. Horrible, 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 horrible. And I just wasn't grasping it.
Wow.
Well, but concurrently, I had, in my first semester, I was trying to take care of my electives and get my, do all the things that you need to do to, at the end of the day, get your degree and comply with all the university agreements around a robust and rounded education. And I'd taken a women's studies course, and this was in 81. And the women's movement, kind of was in the 70s and sort of had this,
Mm.
it had an energy then that is different. I mean, that's what happens with social movements, is they emerge at different times for different reasons, and then mature, and then start to get stale and are refreshed with something else. But anyway, the women's movement had a lot of energy. And I had been a young child during this. So I hit college and I take this women's studies class, and I'm exposed to this field of study and these perspectives and understanding about the dynamics of male and female, issues and all these kinds of things. And I was just very energized by it. And the long story, super duper shortened down,
Mhm.
is that I ended up in a situation where I somehow came across an ad on like this little
Ah.
index cards that people used to post. And someone wanted a researcher to study the field of women in technology. And basically, and I was a great researcher. Because back in the day, we didn't have the internet and you had to know how to research. It was a whole different
Mhm.
world. But I worked for this woman and was her researcher and wrote my notes on little 3x5 cards and all that kind of stuff. But there was very, very little information. And at the time, Omni magazine and like Popular Science were the definitions of how people looked at culture.
Mm.
But I was like, well, I want to study this. And they didn't allow women's studies degrees. It wasn't considered a full-time degree, but there was an opportunity to craft a degree, but you had to make something special. So I was like, I just studied this technology stuff with this woman, and I'm a women's studies major. And I was like, let me put it together. And they accepted it as a degree. I had no idea. Like, when I look
Wow.
back at that, when I look back at my adult self, looks back at my 18-year-old self
Mhm.
going, let me go get my own degree, and presenting it to this board and who had to validate that this was an acceptable degree. There's a bravery and a kind of a
Yeah.
gumption and a go for it that I can see now, that just, can respect and honor about myself, that I did it, like not even knowing where it would go. And but there was a sense and a feeling that I had that something was shifting and coming, and that there was a
Mhm.
change coming. I mean, so I started studying it, and like, I mean, I remember even talking once to a sophisticated professor of all this import and all, and saying to him, in the early 80s, I said, there's a time coming when CEOs are going to write their own letters and they're going to have their own computers. And he was just like, that'll never happen.
Wow.
And I remember being like a 19-year-old and standing in front of a professor who, of course, was the acknowledged expert
Mhm.
in his
Mhm.
field, and just thinking to myself, yeah, you're not right. It's
Mm.
coming. And so for whatever reason, and everyone's got their thing, right? And everyone doesn't need to be an early adopter, because then it wouldn't be early adopting. And I don't know if I'm the earliest adopter, but I'm kind of more at the leading edge, maybe not at
You
the leading
are.
edge.
I'm gonna put you there with the Zuckerbergs and the Gates and the Tim Ferriss. Yes, you
No,
do.
well, okay.
You're our own little asset in Colombia.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. But yeah, I just felt it. I felt, and there was a feeling that I had that this was coming, and that it motivated my focus and my attention on it. And then I mean, to have watched, I didn't stay in the field per se. Like, I didn't graduate and get a a job in the field of culture and
Mhm.
technology, partly because it just wasn't a phenomena and a thing. And I don't know how much I was, dedicated to continued ongoing academic research. I mean, I don't know if that's my thing, but yeah, it was a moment in time, and I embraced it, and it really opened up my eyes. And the other thing that was so cool was I had to then navigate my college degree, finding my degree, because no, my
Mm.
degree didn't exist. I had to take a class. I had to say, well, what's that class? What are my opportunities to do independent study inside of it? How much research, how
Ah.
much is it a curriculum from the professor versus how much is there opportunity for me to write, report, do independent research and all, and to make sure, because I mean, I wanted to get a degree in culture and technology. I didn't want it to be a bogus thing. I mean, I was a student, right? I was going to get my degree. So it was an amazing opportunity to take a structure and a system that didn't have what I wanted, and to find and craft and cobble together what I wanted to create the result. And I think that, especially as a young woman, facing the larger outer world, that those were wonderful experiences for my development. And
Mhm.
you know,
That was powerful. Now I wonder, is that even a thing? How are you able to even get the school, the dean, to let you do that?
it was a really short window of time. Apparently, it was only like 3 or 4 years of a time when the university allowed it. Universities may allow people to do it now. The main thing is they don't want you
No.
to say, oh, I'm going to make up my own degree because I don't feel like taking chemistry or a foreign
Okay.
language or whatever. So there's an academic assessment to make sure that this truly is a legitimate degree that we can see this person doing, we will
Wow.
support it. I mean, it had a beginning and an end. I had to report back, and it had to be valid. And I couldn't just say, I'm going to get this degree and then take a whole bunch of wild courses or whatever. So it was a process. Um, but yeah, like I could, again, I mean, everyone has their strengths, right?
Mhm.
And so one of my strengths is that I can see over time is that I can feel something that's emerging, and
Mhm.
I can know it's emerging, and I'm sort of like a clarion call to others. Just as a little side story, and this is a long story, but I'm going to do the super short version.
No problem.
I felt the hula hoop. I felt the hula hoop returning, and
Mm.
it had been a toy in the 50s, and it actually had really radically changed culture because it showed people moving their hips and all, which was at
Mm.
the time, showing people moving their hips was a culture change. Um, it,
Mm.
the hula hoop is more than a manufacturing phenomenon and a cultural phenomenon. It really did
It
change
was
things.
a symbolism of change.
Exactly. But it also had died down. And it's a long story, but the super short version is I felt suddenly this like fascinated focus on the hula hoop. And I found people through hula hooping. And when I found it, I found my first social network. And then I found the burners, the Burning Man community.
Mhm. Mhm.
But also it was the nascent days of social media. Social YouTube was only 3 months old at the time. And I love to organize content and love to make it easier for people to navigate. Again, that kind of that researcher in me. I was like all over YouTube, all over the internet, finding the best videos of hula hooping because people didn't know how to tag and organize content very well. So like I really had to go in and find stuff, and then I made playlists of like, here's 20 videos of how people are doing stops and starts or double hoops or neck hooping or body. So I did all this kind of stuff, and I found groups, and I was organizing, and I started, this is how I trained myself in social media, which was the intro
Mhm.
to the Hoko blogs, which was I wanted to make a blog about local hula hooping and local resources. And as I found people who were having classes or making hoops, I would write a blog post, and I had to tag it and I had to organize it. And I wanted resources to be available for somebody in another country. So what was like, how did I organize the information that would be relevant and valuable for different people? And so I basically dove into hula hooping at its nascent, super early stages of an emerging phenomena. But because I was so interested in it, I wanted to organize what I was finding. I wanted to learn more myself, but I didn't want just my knowledge to stay
Mhm.
and land with me. I wanted it to be available as a resource to others. And just as a little side note too, my sister took a hula hooping class because she knew I'd started doing it. And she recorded herself taking a class because there weren't any classes near me. I told her about YouTube, told her about tagging, started training her in social media. And my sister has just gone on to be this superstar who's crafted a whole entire world in education, and
Wow.
her issues whether it's seed saving or community preparedness, whatever. She's a master of creating content and was early on. So like my focus triggered my sister's focus, because she has a totally different personality and a totally different relationship to how she creates content. My brother still doesn't even have Facebook or LinkedIn or anything, and uses his girlfriend to find out what's going on in my life, because she goes on the Facebook and checks out what's going on, But or we just call and talk. But yeah, I definitely, it's been an interesting part of my life, is to embrace something that's new, to feel it. And then, but then the weird thing is, the thing that I've done over and over again is, once I feel that the fire has caught, once I knew that hula hooping was a thing, and that the society had caught on, and that this amazing thing, I just realized I just even did a video that's on Amazon about, like, I could teach you how to hula hoop.
Oh, wow.
It's not the greatest video by any means. Might have sold like 11 copies. I don't know. Someone else produced it for it. They wanted to do it. But anyway, once something gets to a certain point, part of my own challenge has been that I build things up, and then I'm kind of like, okay, like even with the local blogging community, it's like, okay, you guys are all good now, right? You're good now, right? You're good. You all know how to connect. You know the tags. These are the local hashtags we use. Blah 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 blah. You all are connected. The relationships are developed. The bloggers know the bloggers. I used to have all these parties for bloggers and reporters and government leaders and people to connect and business leaders and all.
Good.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And but once it had developed, I was like, okay.
Your work is done.
It's like y'all are good,
Yeah.
So that's part of it. I think that's part of why I'm able to continue to embrace things, is because I can embrace something, give it my all, and then I don't have to be the one who owns the ongoing result of it. It's like, if all these people's lives have changed for the better because of local blogging, well, that was the end goal all along. I don't have to keep being my site is not
I totally agree with that. In my head, the word that was coming out was, so you're like the kingmaker or something. But
well, actually, that is part of the story of HOCO blog. So HOCO stands for Howard County, which is what Gloria said.
Oh yeah.
And it's a thing. There's HOCO this and HOCO that and whatever. And we were actually part of making the HOCO phenomena a HOCO phenomena because of the blogs. But
okay.
Part of the origins of HOCO blogs was that there was a really profoundly amazing community leader who was a boomer, an older boomer. And she was like, Jessie, because she knew I was into generation, she's like, we need to get more Gen Xers involved. And I was like, yeah, you don't understand. The Gen Xers aren't interested in stepping into the leadership roles that are offered by the community in the way that other generations might be, because Xers have a different personality around how institutions function. And when I talk about generations, it's a persona that represents the generation, not a definition of how each person inside of the generation is. It's an archetype. But basically, the core motivation that started this whole thing was a boomer saying to me, we need to be able to find the Gen X leaders. And I pissed her off. I returned back to her with a plan that was like $90,000. I'm like, yeah, it's going to be a while to figure them out. Like, there's no list that has Gen X leaders, right? Like, they need to be emerged. They need to be engaged. They need to be brought out. But anyway, so it's not like it's sort of like, that was sort of like a background sort of picture of what I was doing. But I remember about 10 years, I don't even how many years later, 8 or 10 years later, after I started the site, the HOCO blogs, I went to this, like a fundraiser kickoff announcement. One of the bloggers was running for Board of Ed. And I looked around the room, and it's like, this blogger was on the DP, the land development, whatever committee. This one was on the village board. This one was on the such and such. This one had been nominated by another blogger for an award from the governor. And I looked around the room, and what I saw were Gen Xers, and from my understanding and study, are those born 1961 to 1981. And I looked around the room, and what I saw was a room full of Gen Xers, mostly, who had found their voice, found their way, found their particular and unique, wonderful way to contribute to the community from their perspective, their involvement, etc. And it was at that moment where I walked in, and I was in that room, and I was like, I'm done. Like it took about 8 or 10 years from when that woman said, and we need to find the Gen X leaders.
Mm.
And there's no way that $90,000 would have covered my time. And
Mhm.
I don't even know if the plan that I'd given her would have worked or whatever, but I knew that, but I had accomplished what I meant to accomplish. And
Mhm.
that's an ongoing, momentum and a movement now that has its own, power in it, that it doesn't need me to, I mean, I could come back and do more stuff in it or whatever if I wanted, but it also had its moment in its time. And I think that's part of what I've been fairly good about too, is like knowing when it's okay to let go of something. Like, this
Mhm.
doesn't need me anymore. Um,
Mhm.
I've done what I can do, and now other people can handle it, and other people can take
Yeah.
care of these details and all.
So I've always noticed, at least before COVID, that okay, let me rephrase. Before 2019, when I attended a conference, I've always noticed that big companies would buy up smaller um entrepreneurs who had created things. And but then the momentum of those things became smaller after the big companies buy them up. And I've always just wondered, like, is that a good thing? Should you really be selling if the people you were trying to serve no longer become, who needs to be served anymore? Then I attended an event in 2019, and at that event, same thing. A lot of bloggers who were in the finance field would have the opportunity to sell off their blogs and their website. And there was an older gentleman there, and in the particular room it was in, I was volunteering, and I struck up a conversation like, why did he sell his blog? Da 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 da. And then he was like, oh, well, what was my issue with it? And I told him, I was like, I won't be able to serve people, it's a sellout, something like that. He was like, oh no, we should look at it that way. Like, it's more money to be able to still serve, the people he used to serve. And that was when it clicked to me. Like, it wasn't his intention to sell the business anyway. He was just doing something he loved. But to now have money, that thing you love be valuable enough for somebody else to buy it, um, that's more money you can actually use to either make other people's life better or to even make your life better. Okay. So that's my little overview.
Mhm.
So I know that you've built things, Hoko blog, totally Hoko blog. Now, how like how does one even start building? I don't know what is did you know you were building stuff? Like, was it also just like something you liked, like everybody else? It was something you liked, and then you was like, let me just do it. And then, whoa, someone actually put a value to this. And so just explain how to build. If I want to build a community, like what are the signs I should be looking for?
That's a great question. Well, I would offer that definitely around Hoko blogs and what I did with the community there, a lot of it was the timing. A lot of it
Mm,
was the timing, and then I would just say, profound amount of personal dedication to what I thought we were building, the importance of it, and a willingness to put forth incredible energy, um, and consistent energy to something that I believed in.
mm,
So, again, part of it was just the timing. I mean, I actually tried to, I was just communicating with this guy earlier today. We're going to get together for lunch, but the guy I co-created Hoko Blogs with, we check in once a year. So he doesn't live in the area now. And I tried actually to get him to do the site. I'm like, you should do this site. And he was like, no, we should do it. And it really just started as, so again, part of this is just generational for me,
mhm,
which is that as a general rule, the boomer generation tends to be very black and white. They tend to be like, these are my morals and I don't agree with that. I'm
mm,
over here and I don't agree with that. And so what they create is they create this culture war. And they create a culture war that, and depending on where a generation is it in childhood, young adulthood, midlife, or elderhood, it has different influence on society, right? So we were just in this point where boomers were had been in midlife for like 20 years or so. And we're just starting to switch where Gen Xers were moving into midlife. And there was all this contention in the community around this should be built or that shouldn't be built, or this should be invested in or that shouldn't, or we should build this high tower that's going to make the downtown more modern, or other people saying, no, it'll change the flavor. All this, there's all this stuff. And I started to emerge a little bit as a community leader. There were some various and sundry points and ways that I'd been connected in, and everyone wanted me to agree with them here or there. And I'm like, I'm not signing your petition. I'm like, I'm not joining your group, because I agree with a lot of it, but I'm just not into this black and white thing. There's a whole lot of gray. And so in terms of, you're talking about building community, what I knew was that most people that I wanted to be connected to were not black and white. I can respect that you have a solid opinion, a solid value, I can respect that. But it's not a whole lot moves in a community when it's black versus white, and that's the argument we're having, right? And I'm like, I want to meet the people who are willing to talk about the gray. And I want people who are willing to talk about the nuance, to realize that there's some value over here and there's some value over there, and and so the technology was new and it was emerging. And it was a feeling. I was like, to me, social media was a culture change happening on technology, and it portended a whole future that was coming that I could see, because I came to social media as an adult who had a marketing and communications background. So when I started seeing things, even before I was on Facebook and Twitter, but I just started seeing like small activities and things that were happening on social networks. It was tribe.net, if for any of the burners in the house remember that.
And we're gonna come to your Craigslist thing, so don't spill that yet.
Right. But anyway, so just in terms of building community, like so part of it was just personally motivated, which was that it was my hometown. I wanted my town to have more vitality, to have better problem solving. And I was just also energetically, so I am what's called an early wave Gen Xer. I'm born in 1963. So I'm at the cusp of the beginning of a generation. So your place, who you are, where you're born inside your generation also impacts your experience of your generation and your experience of culture change. So I was always like right behind all these boomers, right at that, early transition thing, because Gen Xers start in 1961. I'm born in 63. So much of the people who were just a little bit older and had been older than me and who had been dominating the conversation for so long about the community were of this more black and white thing. And I just desperately wanted there to be a better conversation. And those were the people I wanted to meet. I didn't want to align with the black and the white perspectives. I wanted to meet these people. I believed that they were there. And so did I know what I was creating from the beginning? In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. I had visions. You were talking earlier about selling what you created. I mean, I could see back in 2008, I could absolutely, I tried to have conversations with newspaper publishers and say, you can change your entire industry is about to erupt. Everything's about to change. And by the way, there's a way out. Like, let's get our bloggers, let's get our local hashtags, have revenue sharing. You can track your analytics. You can put ads on things. If you have a food blogger and your food blogger's writing and that traffic is like, you can do revenue sharing. It's all report. Like, I had whole entire visions of like training the community and working with, institutions on whether it's the fire department or the police or whatever. And they started using it, like using hashtags that were specific to our community, because hashtags are specific. And I had visions of how business owners could, get their word out about their live music and their this and their that, using these tools and aggregating it all on these pages that were focused on, and blending the traditional media, the newspapers and the bloggers and the hashtags that were coming in on images and Twitter feeds. And I mean, I could see it all. And so part of the so I was just like really focused on the community and getting people aligned. I definitely ruffled some feathers along the way because some people are like, I want my blog to be in the community section, or I want my blog to be there. And I was like, no, you're not, you don't fit there, and like really ruffled some feathers. But I could really see it. And anyway, and I just remember there was a point just where I just realized that I could never control the hashtags, and that people were using social media from a perspective of the individual, and they weren't using it from the perspective of the community.
What does
Somewhere
that mean? I'm gonna quickly
the,
disturb.
the moment where my dreams were crashed, right? So I had visions of building these community websites, training other communities how to do it, showing them this is how you do it, this is how you get your bloggers, this is how you connect your people, these are the databases you want. I mean, because we were doing all of it. These are your hashtags. This is how, contact your local police. Say these are the hashtags to use. Contact your your local reporters. Like I could see it. And then the calendar, and here's the page on arts and entertainment, and there's a calendar feed on arts and entertainment. Here's the thing about food and food bloggers, and here's all the hashtags about food and hashtags about events happening around food and beer tastings. And I just saw this whole picture, and I saw it as being scalable, and I saw it as being able to grow. And I had like been just balls to the walls, kind of like in it. And then one day on Instagram, I remember seeing, I was trying to capture food related hashtags and pull them in using some early stage tools and widgets and all. And I just remember someone took like a picture of their hamburger at McDonald's and tagged it Howard County. And I was just like, I'm done. Like, I can't control. I can't aggregate local content around local hashtags because I have no control over how people use hashtags. It was just a moment where it was okay. I mean, but I was like, yeah, this is a beast I can't tame. I had tried early on to come in and be like, this is how it works, folks. And this is how to use this as a tool. And this is how to use this effectively. And there was some benefit, and some of it just had to be natural learning and all that people did and all. But at the end of the day, you can't control.
Yeah. And years later, here we are. We still can't control. Can't control it. It's all the way in Africa, Nigeria. It's like, it's grown its own head. So can you share a little bit about the generational intelligence work? Of course, I was born in 74. I'm considered a Gen Xer. Compared to those that are behind us. I think the millennials are the ones behind me. We are the generation that pushes through. I know that for myself. So like the millennials will speak out. They'll fight for their rights, they'll set their boundaries. But I just feel like for me, and maybe this may just be me, but I don't know if it's also reflective of the generation. But I want to say that I find that, we push through. We let everybody else be themselves, and we stay back. I don't know, is that true in the work you've done for in the generational intelligence work, if you can share that? And then I'll stop there because I don't want to tag on another question yet.
Well, generations are a huge subject, and I often liken it to the concept of, does a fish understand water, right? Does a fish understand water? Because it's surrounded by water, can't live unless it's in water. And human beings likely are in an environment where they're always surrounded by culture. You can't separate the human being from the culture, and the culture from the human being. There's the micro level of understanding yourself, your individual self, your relationships with others, your physical self, your all these things. Then there's like the meso level of community, family, groups, different engagements, and then the macro environment of institutions, law, the education system, media, government, all kinds of stuff. And some people say there's a mundo of the larger outer world of just large, vast ecosystems of interaction and engagement. But generations impact all of it, and in part are impacted by all of it. And basically, at the end of the day, what happens is that generations are about 20 years in length. It's about the time that it takes from the firstborn of a generation to reach the coming of age period, which is around 21, 22.
Okay.
And every generation is formed during its childhood, right? So there's outer world events that are happening. There's the inner world, stuff of happening in your own life and your family engagements and all, but there's the larger outer world events that are going in when children don't have the capacity to have critical thinking and to be able to sort what's coming in and what's coming out. When you're a child, you're absorbing and receiving the world that adults have created, that you then take in as your programming about how the outer world functions. And that stuff happens, much of that happens in even what's called a hypnagogic state, which is the 0 to 6 years for a child, which is where they have very, very little memory because their brains are basically downloading, figuring things out, whether it's figuring out how to read body language or facial expressions, or learning how to crawl or to speak and to ask for what you want, or to jump and run, or how to play nice with other kids, or whatever, all the things that, or what's hot and cold, or what food. There's so many things. You go from an infant, to being even just a child. There's just vast learning that has to happen. And essentially part of what the brain does, they know this from brainwaves and all, is that the child's brain, the 0 to 6 brain, sort of goes into this like hypnotic state where it's just receiving and taking information in. And then even as you go on, you're still, again, you're a child, you don't have the reasoning skills or the ability to discern or to ascertain or to take something in and say, is this true for me? That happens more, as you move on in life, more the young adult years of that. So anyway, every generation becomes its own, it has a location in time, and it experiences events at a similar time. And what Gen Xers experience in a very profound way is they experience a time when society decides collectively that it's kind of tired of being focused on children, and it's time for some self-focus, and the society's tired of being civic and focused on the all, and there starts to be this strong need for individual expression and atomization and individual pursuit and creative expression that goes beyond the mainstream and all. And so what happens is adults get super happy about being self-focused, and the cost is this vast neglect of an entire generation of children.
Yeah.
And so Xers learn that there's no net, there's no, there's very little safety or support under them. And so there's a resilience and a pragmatism, but there's also, very much to your point, a kind of live and let live of like, you do you, I'm going to do me. If we can work together, and we need to work together, and it's for the best of both of us, great.
Oh my gosh. That is so true.
It's true. And the thing is, and millennials are completely different, because millennials grow up in the world when adults go, whoa, if you spend 20 years not focused on children, it's kind of scary and kind of challenging and kind of tough. And so they basically, society kind of wholesale just said, well, that's a lost cause. We screwed up with the Gen Xers, and there's this vast reinvestment in the worlds of children and the protection of children. And it increases and gets more so every single year. So it started in 82 with those baby on board images that were it was like a meme that just spread like wildfire. And so millennials grew up in a completely different world. They grew up in a world where they believe that adults and institutions have their back and want their best. And so their entire worldview is a different worldview of expectations around what they expect of institutions, how they want to work and serve institutions. Millennials are much more interested, as a general rule, in civic and government jobs than Gen Xers were. And part of that is because they believe in the power of institutions to do good and do right. Whereas Xers are like, yeah, institutions don't have my back. An Xer can work for the government and do a great job working in the government. It's not that no Xers work in the government or wouldn't take those jobs. It's that the relationship to the institution and the understanding of what institutions are is different from generation to generation. And it's really, it's a huge subject, but essentially what happens is that there are 4 social moods. There are 4 generational archetypes. And each one of them, when Gen Xers are in childhood, that means that this generation's in young adulthood, this generation's in midlife, and this generation's in elderhood. Well, when Gen Xers go from the childhood slot into the young adulthood slot, that means that the generation that was here is now here, and then there's a new generation of children. So what happens is this mood when Gen Xers are in childhood and these generations are in the other phase of life, that has a certain mood. When Gen Xers move to the next spot and all the generations move and their roles and functions and responsibilities in society shift, then it creates a different mood. And so the mood impacts the children, right?
Okay.
So Gen Xers grew up during the consciousness revolution when adults are like, I'm tired of being old,
Mm-hmm.
following the
Mm-hmm.
rules. I'm tired of it. Like, let me have some expression,
Mm-hmm.
let me have some freedom, you know? And and so that's part of what Gen Xers grow up in. Again, millennials grow up in this time after that when it's like, let's focus on the children, let's
Mm-hmm.
focus on child education, on safety, on getting all these dangerous playgrounds, to be safe again, and all the different things. And the movies change and the options for what's for sale, for children change, and how nobody marketed cars to Gen X children. They marketed cars to the adults who had Gen X children.
Mm-hmm.
Millennials, the cars were marketed to the children as much as to the parents because there was an understanding and there was a cultural shift that the children's desires were put in the center. The children's desires, needs were put in the center of the family function.
Oh,
So
you
all
need
these
to.
things, there's zillions and zillions of different examples and stuff and all, but it's just an amazing phenomenon because it's like one of these things where it's like we're all living generational change all the time, but it's very hard to see it in hindsight. Even in
Yeah.
hindsight, it's hard to see. So when there's a model, which is the work that I work from, when you can do the model, you can go above it and you can
Mm-hmm.
look down on it and be like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, like I could, I mean, like, again, like to these times, like so many people are like, oh, blah, 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 and this and that is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that I haven't had my own moments of like, like this is kind of freaky and all, but I can understand it. And I also know it's
Yeah.
all going to change around 2030 because in 2030, that's when, by that time, Gen Xers are going to be starting to go into elderhood. Boomers are going to be, um, moving out of influence in
Mm-hmm.
society, and millennials will be moving into midlife, which is the seat of power in terms of the operations of daily life. And there'll be another generation, the homeland generation. They're not Gen Zs, unfortunately. Everyone says they are, but it's a different generation that is a little later. They're
Mm-hmm.
they're born 2005 and after. They'll be the next young adults, and there'll be another. As the boomers are dying out on the old end, there'll be another version of boomers coming through and being born and being the children of the new golden age. So, we got some serious times ahead of us because we are smack dab in the middle of a 20-year crisis era, and we're about 10, 11
Oh,
years into it. So,
uh-huh.
so people are like, oh, goodbye 2020. And I'm like, oh,
Oh,
no,
no, we
hello,
just started.
decade.
I can see
Decade.
that too. I can see that 2020 is ushering in something.
Mhm.
Like I joke with my sisters and I always say, oh, like I feel like, you know, the movies we used to watch, like, the Terminators and maybe like Mad Max. And it used to be so dark in those movies, like the shots and people like
Mhm.
being bunkers and stuff. I'm like, I just feel like that's the future, but I may be a little off.
Mhm.
But that makes me wonder. So for
Mhm.
two groups of people, um, that would be like my current 12-year-old who was born 2008. And then the
Mhm.
ones that were just born, like we had a lot of people give birth in 2020 due to COVID. They
Mhm.
had enough time to be pregnant and give birth at the same time. Like, so what are those two groups? They've been online. My son, he's in sixth grade, all through COVID. Um, and I'm just like, I don't even know. Thinking about it, I'm like, in the future, oh, when you buy a house, I'm sorry about that, you will always buy a house that has an extra room for your office. Because to me, I think this virtual world is the norm going forward for them. Um,
Well,
so
so yes to the virtual world. I would say that absolutely yes. So your child who is 12 and born in 2008 is an early wave homeland generation child. That those children born 2005 and afterward share the same generational persona as what we know today as the silent generation. The silent generation is um, Joe Biden's generation. It's Martin Luther King's generation. It's the Beatles' generation. It's a generation that is empathetic, kind, decent, um,
mm,
their creativity comes from an internal examination, and then their art and their expression. They're the greatest poets, the greatest writers, the greatest playwrights, the greatest musicians of the time, because it's an internal journey to boomers go internal to find their values. The silent generation, the generation that your child is, they go in an exploratory like sense of like trying to understand themselves. Boomers go in to try to find their values and morals, and it's a different exploration. But they're a very decent generation. They're not great leaders. I mean, Joe Biden, I listened to him yesterday. I mean, I voted for him and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, I listened to him yesterday when he was announcing his cabinet, and it was just like, I listened for like 3 minutes. It's like, oh God, you're so boring and you're so lifeless and you're so, and now part of that is his age, but also part of it is just simply that this generation does not inspire confidence. And they don't, and that's their life path. It doesn't mean that some people in their generation won't, and they'll be their leaders in their own way, in their own style. They're the great mediators, the great arbitrators, they're the great understanders of the human condition.
And advisors too, I've heard.
And huge advisors. They're actually the credentialed experts. This whole world of people having their own facts and their own perspectives, and all this kind of stuff, and bloggers writing this, and people, facts all over the place. In this world that we live in now, it's going to change, and it'll become more the credentialed expert. Your son's generation will become the credentialed expert thing. But to your point about when you said about buying a house with an extra room for an office, I don't know, because see, the thing is the pendulum switches, right? So right now what we're experiencing conditions, COVID and other conditions, where people are like, let's work from home. Well, you always have to understand things through the lens of generation. Not always have to, but there's always an opportunity to understand things through the lens of generations. And what we have is the generation in midlife is Gen Xers now, right? The generation in midlife is, Xers are 40 to 60, I think, in 2021. Yeah. Okay. So when you're in your 40s to your 60s, mid 40s to mid 60s is kind of midlife, right? The generation in midlife has the most profound say over the day-to-day operations of society. That makes sense, right? You're in your 40s, your mid 40s, your mid 50s, your mid 60s, your experience, you're maybe not the CEO, but you're the vice president or whatever. You may not be the chairperson of the committee in the Senate or whatever, but you've made it onto the Senate floor. I don't know, whatever. But so Xers fight for very little for themselves. Xers are actually, for as mercenary as they are as a generation, for as much as they take care of themselves, societally, they fight for very little for themselves, because they were so hurt by societal impact as children that they actually it doesn't become an I'm going to hurt you. It may be an I'm going to take care of myself first thing, but Gen Xers actually make decisions for the all, more so than any other generation does, which will become true over the course of their lives. Side story. But the one thing that Gen X, not one thing, a very, very, very high level thing that Gen Xers do advocate for is work-life balance. Because Xers are committed to results and boomers are committed to perfection. Perfection and results are not the same thing. And Xers have been following behind boomers because their boomers are above them, right? Mm-hmm. They're older. So Xers have always been in an environment as young adults where boomers were their supervisors. So many Xers have experiences of working their butts off, solving whatever problem, meeting some insane deadline that if anyone had been planning, never should have been a rush, blah, 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 doing all this work, putting in a 90-hour work week. And then the next week they're like, oh, I'm going to be taking off Monday and Tuesday. And their older bosses are like, no, I need you here at 8 a.m. And Xers are like, no, I got the work done. Not only did I already do this week's work last week, but I even solved problems that you didn't even know you had. Exactly. And I just saved the company X% or whatever dollars, or found some solution or whatever, right? So to the Xer mindset, it's like, I have solved the problems. I have taken care of business. I have done what needs to be done. You don't need to see me. Mm-hmm. It's a non-issue. And your need to see me is your ego and a value system that I don't agree with. So for Xers, the work-life balance thing, the working from home, the COVID thing is a bizarre. I mean, I get it, right? Not everyone works as well from home. Some people, the isolate. There's a thousand factors, and while it is true that I do believe that we're going to have more work from anywhere philosophy, there'll be more spreading out. But I think that we will actually see a return to the desire to go back to work when Xers start moving more into elderhood, and when millennials are actually more, the millennials like their lives. What millennials desire, millennials are born 1982 to 2004. The core millennial desire is for a well-rounded conventional life. A well-rounded conventional life is a different desire than having work-life balance. And so, while yes, the technologies that allow people to work elsewhere and around and all are make for lots of possibilities and lots of opportunities, I think that we will actually probably see a return to the desire to head back to the office in a decade or so. Okay. I could be wrong. Okay. But that's my guess.
Okay. I'm going to go with your
we can like do another podcast in a decade.
Exactly. In a decade, I'll be like, yay, what happened? Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's good. Yeah. And so I think I have two more questions, and you can pass on this one.
Okay.
This one if you want to. But I was like, okay, even though I know Jessie, let me go just Google more stuff on her. So I came up with this picture, which looks like you were in a Hallmark movie. It was the one where someone had written something in Huffington Post about you put in an ad on Craigslist. And people, this is why I say like Jessie does things that are so futuristic. I was like, wait, this should be like a reality show or something. And you put it on Craigslist that you were looking for a date, but also someone with affluence and connections in the community and whatever in society, government. But I read that and I was like, wait, that is really, really smart. That's a targeted dating situation right there. First of all, we need an app for that. So you need to work on that. Like no emotional commitments, but definitely more networking, but top level networking.
So that was suggested to me by a friend of mine who was a farmer. I mean, he'd been a geologist for many years, but he'd gone on to try his hand at organic farming and all. And I used to go and visit them all the time because this guy was in partnership with a very good friend of mine. And I loved the farm and going up there, and it was beautiful. And I was bemoaning, I don't know if I was talking about business and connections or just life. I don't know, whatever I was complaining about or whatever at the time. And he was like, he made some comment about, oh, you need to go to weddings. And I was like, oh, I haven't been invited to many weddings. And apparently this guy had been to gobs and gobs of weddings. And I just, for whatever reason, in my social network, had not been to a whole lot of weddings. Never been a bridesmaid. And I just hadn't been invited to a whole lot of weddings. He's like, Jessie, he's like, weddings are the ultimate networking place because you're there you're it's like if you've been invited to a wedding, you've passed, you've been accepted into a certain circle because there's only so many seats at a wedding reception. And he said people are just really open and friendly at weddings. And so he told me, his name was Dan. Dan was like, your assignment is to go home and to put yourself out. He goes, write an ad and put yourself out. And he was very specific. He's like, oh, you're not looking for you're looking for a young woman, a wedding for a young woman who's on her first wedding, who's in the upper tier of, whatever political, social, business, whatever circles. And he goes, and all you have to do is offer yourself as a date. He goes, it's not, you're not starting a relationship with a guy. It goes, it might be someone who, for whatever reason, doesn't want to bring who he's dating or doesn't want to show up once again at a wedding with a family without a date. And he's like, he goes, you're a reasonable date. You can talk to anyone.
Yeah.
You don't need to be babysat at an event. I'm like, no, I'm fine. I can hold my liquor and basically I don't drink. And I can get on the dance floor and, But anyway, so yeah, so I put that ad out and got some bizarre responses.
I read, but it sounds like a really great idea.
It did
And
sound like a good idea.
I would love to end with you just sharing a little bit about the things you have in the works in the future, and also where people can find you. um Again, I have enjoyed our conversation. um I love the generational work
Mhm,
that you're doing. um Again, you're such an inspiring person. I like your perspective on the world.
thank you.
And so I'm always there with everybody else at your Facebook page. So
Wow,
yes,
thank you.
share those handles for the
Yeah.
rest of the people. Thank you.
So yeah, did you want me to say about what I'm up to, or just where people can find me?
So just share about what you're up to, and
Mhm.
then where people can find you.
Yeah. So in terms of what I'm up to, I just wrote a book about generations and basically got feedback from friends and all that it wasn't a book and wasn't ready. And that was a real, so I've had a lot of come to Jesus moments for myself around like what I want to do with that. And I had someone who just like helped open my eyes to like writing my perspective rather than I've been trying to share the theory and trying to make the
Hmm.
theory simpler for other people to understand. Um, but I find myself struggling with that. So I'm working on just writing my perspective around society and culture change and generations and tuning in and giving myself the gift of having done that. Where that will go and what that will become, I don't know. I've had a story for many years that I'm going to someday emerge as this generational consultant and change the world. And that may or may not be a mere thing. So I've had a lot of moments of surrendering, just being
Mm.
like, okay, I don't know what it's going to be. And also putting in more effort and more energy. I have found that some sativa edibles help me. I don't know if they make me write great, but they at least release my fear about sitting down and writing. I continue to work for a website company, a digital marketing firm. I do some sales for them. It's really nice because what I love about it is my company does really good work. And once I do the sale, the company takes care of the work and I get a commission check. It goes on and on. So the Gen Xer in me that wants income from multiple sources, I do occasionally get like 97 cents I actually do get like a monthly check from Amazon for
For
my
the
various
book.
books. But it's like, make like, if I make like $10 a month, that's like really doing well. But so anyway, and then I've actually, the other thing that we haven't really talked about much or whatever, but just in terms of dating and all, I've just recently opened up to the idea of like, I've just met some really wonderful guys lately and
Okay.
have just opened up more to the idea of, I'm not going to say polyamory per se, but just more in the sense of like, maybe it's okay to have multiple boyfriends and that's okay.
Ah,
And
okay. I was gonna ask what polyamory.
yeah, I mean, there's so many different languages and words and ethical non-monogamy and this and that, whatever, and all this kind of stuff. But and there's many different perspectives on this, and
So,
and
so
and
what
it's
is it? Is it that you're not dating exclusively, or is it that you are in bed together? What does that mean, polyamory?
well, I'm learning myself, what the words mean and all, because people have different definitions about
Okay.
them and all. But basically, I am giving myself permission to not need one person to be my all, and so I'm open to exploring, different dating options and different
Okay.
having different people in my life.
Oh, what the millennials do. Ah, you're good.
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, I'm,
You're
I'm, I'm,
you're
I'm, I'm behind the curve on this one.
exactly. Yeah. They,
I'm
they
following
tell
the
me
lead.
they tell me, oh, like you're taking it too seriously. Like it's not a marriage. You're just going out on a date. You ask
Exactly.
questions. You do.
Mhm.
I was like,
Yeah,
yeah. Like, oh, really?
yeah, yeah. So that's kind of new for me. That's actually pretty new for me because like I said, I've met really wonderful guys who've been very transformative and eye opening for me and helping me see what I've been manifesting and all. So yeah,
Oh, that's
I feel overall that like one of the things I think is true for me is that no matter how many times I stumble and fall and just am in the depths of despair of like, I messed up, I screwed up, this, that, whatever, um, I just feel like I'm getting better at the programming in my mind and being able to lift myself up and surround myself with good people who can reflect back to me and help me see. And that, and it's challenging, at 57 to like, on one hand, be like really understanding and cognizant of the fact that like elderhood is around the corner, and
Mm-hmm.
around elderhood is death. I mean, I don't know what my death date is, but and also like really being like, okay, like I want to keep embracing. So anyway, so in terms of where to find me, I mean, the easiest thing is just jessienewburn.com, because that leads to my generation site, and I'm pretty public on. I mean, I'm on Twitter and my my Facebook. I don't hide my Facebook posts. I'm like, I decided that when Trump got elected, I got really afraid of speaking my mind, and that I had visions of like, and then they could do this and they could do that, and
Yeah.
they could tack this, and they could this data, and then if I spoke out against him, and it could become this authoritarian regime, and then I had these fears, of like, oh, it could be. I mean, like my brain could go like, it could become like blah blah blah. I also have the generational understanding of like we're in a crisis era, and in crisis
Yeah.
eras is when you get your fascist
Yeah.
and nationalist
Yeah.
leaders, and I just decided, I was like, I'm just going to own what I say. I'm going to stand behind what I say. And it's, and I reserve the right to change my mind, and I'm going to speak, and I'm not going to be afraid to speak my mind. So I'm pretty public on Facebook,
Okay.
Post my perspectives. So I'm
And
findable
and
there.
and your generational work website, even though it
It's,
links from
yeah, it's
Jessie.
generationswork.com.
Okay,
Yeah.
generations
Yeah.
work. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I think I picked it the other day, and
Mm-hmm.
it has a lot of robust information. So
Yeah.
kudos on the work you do. I think there's a place for it, um, as we go ahead into the future. So once again, thank you so much for
Thank you.
having this conversation with me today.
My pleasure.
And thank you. Same here. And thanks everyone for listening. See you all soon.